welcome to another rock and roll road trip. I'm Sammy Hagar, this is Roger Daltrey, and the Who just finished a sound check so we can start this show. Roger, thank you for doing this show, first of all.
Good to see you,
pleasure.
mate.
We've never met.
Nope.
100 years we've been in the business, probably the same age, damn near I know we're a year or two apart, maybe, but...
I think I got you beat.
Not by much. Well, you look better than me, so okay. How the fuck do you stay in such great shape? Your whole life you've had a six-pack in the 60s.
Rock legend Sammy Hagar finally meets his lifelong hero Roger Daltrey of The Who, and the moment is pure rock history. Sammy Hagar walked into the room with the kind of excitement that even decades of rock stardom could not hide. This was not just another backstage moment, not another famous musician waiting behind a curtain before a show. For Sammy Hagar, a man who had stood on the biggest stages in the world, sung in front of hundreds of thousands of fans, and built a legendary career with bands like Van Halen and Montrose, this moment felt different, because waiting only a few feet away was someone he had admired since the earliest days of his life in rock and roll. Standing there with that unmistakable voice, that powerful presence, and that history written into every note he had ever sung was Roger Daltrey, the iconic frontman of The Who. For Hagar, this was not simply meeting another rock legend. This was meeting a hero. Sammy Hagar had spent most of his life surrounded by music. From the gritty bar stages where he first learned to command a crowd, to the massive arenas that later defined his career, music had always been the center of everything. But long before he became the Red Rocker, long before platinum records and sold-out tours, Hagar was just another kid who felt electricity. The first time he heard real rock and roll blasting through speakers, among the bands that completely changed the way he saw music, The Who stood at the top of the mountain. Their sound was explosive, their attitude fearless, and their live performances looked like something from another planet to a young musician who was still figuring out his own voice. Roger Daltrey's voice in particular had left a deep mark on Hagar. It wasn't just powerful, it carried a kind of raw honesty that felt almost dangerous. When The Who released songs like My Generation, Baba O'Reilly, and Won't Get Fooled Again, the world didn't just hear music. It heard rebellion, confidence, and the sound of a band pushing rock and roll into a completely new dimension. Hagar had listened to those records over and over, absorbing every scream, every vocal run, every burst of emotion that Daltrey delivered. In many ways, those performances helped shape the fearless style that would later become Hagar's trademark. Years passed, and Sammy Hagar's own career exploded. He built a reputation as one of the most energetic performers in rock music, a singer who could fill an arena with pure power and joy. Fans loved his confidence, his humor, and the way he turned every concert into a celebration. Yet despite all the success, the legends who inspired him never lost their place in his mind, and Roger Daltrey remained one of those untouchable giants of rock history. So when the opportunity finally came for Hagar to meet the man whose voice had once blasted through his teenage speakers, it carried a weight that even a veteran rock star could feel. The room itself was not especially dramatic. There were no flashing lights, no roaring crowds, no stage smoke rolling through the air. Just two musicians standing in the same space, connected by decades of music history. But emotionally, the moment felt enormous. Sammy Hagar approached with a grin that revealed both admiration and disbelief. He had met countless celebrities throughout his career, but meeting Roger Daltrey felt like stepping into the pages of rock and roll history. The man standing in front of him wasn't just a singer. He was a symbol of an era when music was loud, rebellious, and completely alive. Roger Daltrey, known for his strong presence and unmistakable voice, greeted Hagar with warmth and curiosity. Despite decades of fame, Daltrey carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had seen everything the music world could throw at him. He had survived the wildest years of rock history, led one of the most influential bands ever formed, and continued performing with the same intensity that made The Who legendary in the first place. The conversation began naturally, almost like two old friends reconnecting even though they had never truly spent time together before. Hagar spoke openly about how much The Who had meant to him growing up. He described the first time he heard Daltrey's voice tearing through a song, and how it made him realize that rock singers didn't have to be polite or controlled. They could be explosive, emotional, and completely fearless. Daltrey listened with a mixture of appreciation and quiet amusement. Over the years, he had heard many musicians describe The Who as an influence, but there was something genuine in Hagar's excitement that made the moment feel special. This wasn't just professional respect. It was the kind of admiration that comes from a fan who never forgot where the inspiration started. The room filled with stories almost immediately. Rock history has a way of weaving lives together in strange ways, and both men had experienced decades of unforgettable moments. They talked about the chaos of early tours, the unpredictable energy of live crowds, and the strange reality of watching songs become part of the cultural fabric of the world. For Hagar, the most fascinating part of the conversation was hearing Daltrey reflect on the early days of The Who. The band had not started as legends. They were just a group of young musicians determined to play louder and harder than anyone else. Their shows became famous for smashing guitars, destroying drum kits, and pushing the limits of what a rock performance could be. Daltrey's powerful voice often felt like the force holding that wild energy together. Listening to those stories, Hagar could see the roots of so much modern rock music. Bands like Van Halen and countless others had inherited that fearless spirit that The Who helped ignite. The meeting was no longer just about admiration. It was a moment of connection between generations of rock performers who had all carried the same rebellious flame. At one point during the conversation, Hagar laughed and admitted that meeting Daltrey made him feel like a young fan again. Despite everything he had accomplished, standing next to one of the voices that shaped his musical identity reminded him why he fell in love with rock music in the first place. It was never just about fame or success. It was about the power of a voice, the energy of a band, and the feeling that music could shake the world. Roger Daltrey smiled at that honesty. After decades of performing, he understood exactly what Hagar meant. The magic of rock music had always come from that emotional spark between artists and the people who listened to them. And in that moment, the two singers were not just famous musicians. They were two fans of the same powerful sound that had shaped their lives. The meeting between Sammy Hagar and Roger Daltrey continued with laughter, shared memories, and a deep sense of respect that only true musicians can fully understand. Sammy Hagar stood beside Roger Daltrey with the kind of excitement that reminded him of the earliest days of his musical journey. Even after decades of performing across the world, moments like this still carried a special kind of electricity. The two singers represented different chapters of rock history, yet their stories were connected by the same roaring energy that had defined the genre for generations. As their conversation continued, it became clear that this meeting was not just about admiration. It was about two artists recognizing the long road that had brought them both to this point. Roger Daltrey had seen rock music grow from a rebellious underground sound into a global cultural force. When The Who first exploded onto the scene in the 1960s, the music industry was still trying to understand the raw power of amplified guitars and aggressive vocals. But The Who did not wait for permission. They built their reputation through pure intensity. Their shows were loud, unpredictable, and unforgettable. Daltrey's voice carried a thunder that cut through every chaotic moment, on stage, anchoring the band's wild energy with undeniable authority. Sammy Hagar listened closely as Daltrey shared memories from those early years. For Hagar, hearing these stories felt like listening to living history. The Who had helped create the blueprint for modern rock performance. The band's fearless attitude influenced countless musicians who came after them, including Hagar himself. Every time Hagar stepped onto a stage and poured everything into a performance, a piece of that original rock spirit lived inside the moment. Hagar eventually spoke about how strange it felt to stand next to one of the voices that had shaped his own musical identity. He admitted that when he first started singing, he studied the vocal styles of many legendary performers, but Roger Daltrey stood out in a powerful way. There was something about the emotional punch behind Daltrey's delivery that made every lyric feel important. It wasn't just singing, it was storytelling, rebellion, and pure energy all at once. Daltrey responded with a thoughtful smile. Over the years, he had heard many musicians describe the influence of The Who, yet he always seemed slightly surprised by how deeply those songs had affected people. When the band recorded those tracks decades earlier, they were simply trying to capture the energy they felt in the studio and on stage. They never imagined that the sound would travel across generations, inspiring future artists who would carry the torch of rock music forward. The conversation gradually turned toward life on the road, one of the most defining experiences for any rock performer. Both Hagar and Daltrey knew the strange rhythm of touring life. Endless flights, loud crowds, sleepless nights, and the adrenaline rush that only comes from standing under stage lights with thousands of fans screaming in excitement. Those experiences create a bond between musicians that few outsiders can truly understand. Hagar shared stories from his years performing with Van Halen, describing the wild atmosphere of those massive arena tours. The band's shows were explosive, filled with huge guitar solos, powerful vocals, and a sense of celebration that defined Hagar's era with the group. Every performance felt like a party fueled by pure rock and roll energy. Daltrey laughed as he heard those stories, remembering how The Who had created a similar sense of chaos decades earlier. Their concerts were famous for unpredictable moments. Instruments were smashed, amplifiers roared, and audiences felt like they were witnessing something completely untamed. Yet behind all that chaos was a deep dedication to the music itself. For both singers, the stage was always the place where everything made sense. As the meeting continued, the admiration between the two musicians became even more clear. Hagar spoke openly about the impact of The Who's classic songs, explaining how tracks like Baba O'Reilly had a timeless quality that still electrified audiences today. The emotional power of those recordings had not faded with time. If anything, the songs had grown stronger as new generations discovered them. Daltrey appreciated hearing that perspective from another performer who understood the challenge of keeping music alive across decades. Rock music constantly evolves, but certain songs manage to remain powerful no matter how much time passes. The secret, according to Daltrey, was honesty. When a song captures a real feeling, listeners can sense that truth no matter when they hear it. Hagar nodded in agreement. Throughout his own career, he had always tried to bring that same honesty to the stage. Fans could feel when a performer truly believed in the music they were singing. That connection between artist and audience created the unforgettable moments that people carried with them long after the show ended. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward the future of rock music. Both men had witnessed enormous changes in the industry, from vinyl records to digital streaming, from small clubs to massive global festivals. Yet despite all the technological shifts, one thing had remained constant. The energy of a powerful voice and a roaring guitar could still make people feel alive. Hagar expressed hope that younger musicians would continue embracing that spirit. Rock music had always been about passion, rebellion, and emotional honesty. Those qualities could never truly disappear, as long as artists kept pushing themselves to create something real. Roger Daltrey agreed. Even after decades of performing, he still believed in the power of music to bring people together. Every time a crowd sang along to a classic song, it proved that rock and roll still had a heartbeat. As their meeting finally began to wind down, Sammy Hagar looked at Roger Daltrey with genuine gratitude. Moments like this did not happen every day. Standing face to face with someone who had helped shape the entire landscape of rock music was both humbling and inspiring. For Daltrey, the meeting was equally meaningful in its own way. Seeing how his work had influenced another legendary performer reminded him why he had dedicated his life to music in the first place. The songs had traveled far beyond the original stage where they were born, reaching new voices who carried the sound forward. When the two singers eventually parted ways, the room felt quieter than before. But the energy of the moment lingered. It was the kind of meeting that captured the heart of rock history. One generation of music legends acknowledging, another sharing stories, laughter, and respect. Sammy Hagar walked away from that encounter with a renewed appreciation for the journey that had shaped his career. Meeting Roger Daltrey was not just a memorable celebrity moment. It was a reminder of the roots of rock music, the voices that started it all, and the enduring power of a song that refuses to fade with time.